This Share the Wealth is about introduction to Vault. I'm Dan Franco. I'm an architect here at GlideFast, and I'd like to share some knowledge about Vault. Okay, so here's our rough agenda. What is Vault? Why you might use Vault, and some little demo and discussion. Just to put it out there, this is less technical, maybe less demo, and more of an overview of Vault in general. The reason I wanted to have this share the wealth especially is because the term ServiceNow Vault is thrown out there a lot. It's like, oh, we want to implement ServiceNow Vault or use ServiceNow Vault, but really Vault in and of itself is not one product. It's a bunch of products under that one umbrella. So this is to give a high level overview of what's part of that under the umbrella of Vault and sort of a high level view of the different features and functionalities that are in there. And I think this is a matter of a lot of times if you don't know it's out there, you don't know how to bring it up to customers or to even think about implementing it. There's a lot of neat features and offerings underneath Vault and the products that are in there. All right, so here we'll just do a quick overview of what products are under Vault. So you have Zero Trust, which is helps facilitate least privilege access controls. You have Platform Encryption, which this is a pretty big one. This talks about whether you're doing database encryption, column level encryption, edge encryption. There's a bunch of the key management framework, which underpins all of that basically. So there's a lot under platform encryption. This especially could probably use its own share of the wealth. Data anonymization and discovery. This is actually a really neat one that I think a lot of people can get a lot of use out of, and it's pretty simple, but it's pretty powerful. So you can anonymize data and you can discover different types of data in your environment, and we'll talk in more depth about what that means. Secrets management. So this is a capability for finer grained control around passwords and API keys and certificates and that sort of thing that's used within ServiceNow, mainly on ITOM. And then log export service, which is a neat feature where you can actually export the platform logs into an external system. So you can look at that along with your other system logs that you might have in your organization. And then code signing, which is, I'd say it's a pretty specific use case, but it allows you to sign your code when moving from sub-production to production instances. So that's the high level of all the products on there. So you can see like in each one of these, there's a lot of features. So we're going to dive in to each in a little more detail. So Zero Trust and adaptive authentication. So the main benefits of this are you're going to have a finer control of access. And what that means is, as opposed to just someone logs in, you actually get more control over where are they located, what's their IP address, what's their role. So there are pre and post activities that can take place, and even while you're already in the instance working, there's some other things that can be triggered. This is meant more to protect against insider threats. Since it's post authentication, it's like, okay, someone's already inside the system. What are additional controls we can put in? A lot of these products within Vault, their focus is going to be on meeting compliance, the various compliances and regulatory requirements that organizations are subject to. So some key concepts, there's adaptive authentication, which is going to allow you to set up filter criteria based on the IP role and group. And there's an additional offering with Zero Trust, such as identity provider attributes and locations. So if you're using SSO and the identity provider provides some other attributes, you can actually use those as part of the authentication as well. Also, with a lot of these products, there's a core offering and then some additional premium offerings that you can add. Zero Trust is one such of those offerings. And on a later slide for each of these, I cover how you get access to these, whether or not you can use them in a PDI. I know for myself personally, a lot of it is like, oh, I want to be able to try this out, and I'm sure customers want to do the same, be able to, and if you can do it in a PDI, you're not going to mess up, any of your instances. So another concept is pre and post authentication context. So policies are configured to control behavior pre or post. So, like I mentioned earlier, these actually come into play either before you log in or after you log in. Some of that information it's gonna get is like your role or your group membership is not going to be available until you have authenticated, and then it's like, oh, you're this user, I can look at their roles or your group memberships. And then another key concept is policy inputs and outputs. So these are configured to control the behavior pre and post authentication. The inputs are the filters to this, and the outputs are the definitions of the actual conditions. So an example of a filter would be, you're going to say, oh, I want to filter based on role, right? And that's going to be an input to one of these policies, and on the output end, the filter would be, I'm looking for the role of idle. So it's a slightly different terminology, I think, that at least I'm used to seeing in ServiceNow, but that's the high level of what that means. All right, and then this is a picture from ServiceNow of how this all flows, right? So you have your filter criteria, which I talked about up top, where you can also look by, if it's the mobile app that's trusted, and then what authentication method, role, IP address, etc. This is one of the premium features of Zero Trust. You can look by, you can also perform actions on location or identity provider attributes. You have the policies where these are the inputs to that, and then you make a decision based on the criteria that you set, and then you're going to do something with that. So you can deny access to the instance entirely. You can force them to use MFA, right? So okay, I've noticed based on your IP address or your role, like maybe you have admin and you want to enforce some sort of admin, you want to enforce MFA on that, you can do that there. You can just allow full access, or you can, this is an interesting one that's part of Zero Trust, where based on these criteria, like say someone's, working from a location, out of your normal allowed locations, you can say, oh, I see that you're, outside of the country. I'll let you, be look at have an idle role, but I won't let you have a higher admin role since you're outside of a location. So it's that's an interesting feature, but it's part of the premium offering. All right, and then these are the out-of-box policies that you can configure. Uh, so you can see the different MFA policies, whether or not you're denied or allowed, and then MFA. So these are the out-of-box policies out there. How do I get it? So there's a plugin called Adaptive Authentication that you can activate. I think this is actually activated by default, at least on new instances. It wasn't by PDI. And yes, you can use this in a PDI. So definitely recommend playing around with it there. The Zero Trust capability is not available in a PDI. It's interesting because the plugin seems to show up, but it doesn't actually let you configure it. So that's adaptive authentication and Zero Trust. So the next product in there is platform encryption. So this is a big one, as I mentioned. Some of the main benefits are protecting the data at rest and in transit. We're going to see there's different options for protecting, database down to the field level, and whether or not you're doing that at rest or in transit. That's a big benefit and capability across all the offerings under this. Meeting compliance, and then really controlling your data, right? So limiting who can see the data, and that limiting can extend to limiting ServiceNow from seeing that data as well, right? So there's a lot of key concepts in this one. The key management framework is pretty much underpins all of these other offerings. So this is a feature for protection management and lifecycle of keys. Depending on licensing, customers can use ServiceNow provided keys or provide their own. So this is where you have that couple of tiers of offerings, right? You have a core offering, and then you have a an enterprise offering that gives you other capabilities around key management and some other advanced features around configuration. Cloud encryption, also known as database encryption, this is going to encrypt the database at rest. It leverages the KMF just like everything else. Um, didn't finish my sentence here. Field encryption, also known as column level encryption. So this is going to let you do encryption at individual fields and have control over who can read and write those things. Full disk encryption. This is another database encryption that's going to happen for the database server, and it's meant to protect against physical loss. It's protecting that data. You know, if someone somehow steals the disk for the database, it's gonna protect against that physical loss. And then edge encryption is going to encrypt the data in flight to the ServiceNow instance over the internet, and this requires the use of a proxy server. There's a lot under the encryption umbrella here. So how do you get it? So there's lots of different methods to activate depending on the feature. Some of them, like KMF, at least the core version of it is available in your PDI. Same with field encryption, although you don't have some of the enterprise features that are in there. And then cloud, full disk, and edge encryption aren't available in a PDI. So that's not something you can really play around with there, because it's a number of those. Actually, you have to have ServiceNow like activate them. You can't do that yourself via the store or anything like that. So yeah, as we see, there are a lot of concepts and items underneath that encryption umbrella. All right, and next we have data anonymization. This is actually an interesting one. I definitely have had some customers who had concerns about having their customers' data, especially in lower environments, right? So if you have partners or other developers working in the environment, they may not have access to production. Lots of times we don't, right? And you may be working in lower instances, but they don't necessarily want you to see the real production data. So this actually supports that, as long as GDPR and rights of forget. So you could use this in a production scenario, although you want to be pretty careful with that. But it's going to help minimize data leaks, right? So especially if you're doing clones from production to your other environments, which most people do, you can post clone actually say, okay, I want to anonymize all this data, so I'm going to minimize the potential for a leak out of those lower environments, because that data is scrubbed. And then by doing that, you're ensuring user confidentiality. One of the interesting use cases that ServiceNow calls out for this is in the retail space, right? You might want to do some analysis on the data, but you want to you don't necessarily need some of the confidential data to be actual data. So you can kind of anonymize that data, so you can perform analysis on it without violating confidentiality. Some key concepts here again, classifying data. So first, to be able to use this, first you have to actually classify the data. You can define your own classifications, but you go through and you say, okay, this is restricted or confidential or PII. And what's actually really neat about this is that if you get a request by someone to say where do we have like this special data or this sensitive data in ServiceNow, you can quickly go. I'll show a dashboard quickly. You can quickly go and say, okay, this is all the data and the fields it's in and the classification of it. The anonymization techniques. So there's a bunch of out of box techniques for doing the anonymization when you schedule that. There's several out of box like replace options. There's a few varieties of that. There's a random, and then there's just a clear out the field that's available. And then this is also interesting too, I think probably to protect yourself from doing damage, but there's roles that separate the responsibilities. So you can't be a creator of a policy that's anonymizing data and the person that schedules it. Like you can't actually have those two roles at the same time, which leads into this. So there's a number of roles about in play here where you can be an admin, where you can create the techniques and the policies, but you can't actually do anything with the jobs. And separately, you have someone where someone can just view the jobs, and then other roles where they can actually run the jobs, against the policies that have been created. And then this actually will show up just like security admin does, where you have to elevate your role, and then you can create those policies. So it's an interesting case where you see that show up in the elevate role. Right. And then how do you get it? You can get this from the store. And yes, it can be used in a PDI. So I'm going to jump out quick here and just show really quickly the data classification here. Come on, PDI. All right, and so there's also a dashboard for this, which I'll show, but you can actually see like here are the fields that I have that I've identified, that I've classified a certain way, right? So I have the 14 fields where I have PII, or two that I have internal, or these numbers here. And then in the classification, you have these out of box classifications, so confidential. You can actually nest them too. And if I, click on PII, I can say, okay, we have like all these fields we're calling PII. So it's a really nice way to be able to tag those fields and say that they contain this certain type of information, and then properly manage it from there. So if we look at the anonymization, like I have to elevate myself here to the processor, and then I should be able to see this page. Right. And this is where you can actually see the various techniques. And if I had the right role, I could add a custom one. You probably don't need to. There's a lot of options here, but you have, a number of different ways to replace, a random replace, a remove, and then a no action, which comes into play when you actually set up the jobs. So if I look at, I think I should be able to look at this policy. But basically you can set what data you're going to use, what data class you're operating on here, and then assign a technique to the fields underneath that. So you can say, oh, I have all these identified as PII, but I'm not going to do with them, or perform different actions based on those different fields. So as a test, I did one for mobile phone, and we can see a random replace here. If we look at our user Abraham Lincoln, this phone number, what looked like a phone number, but I ran the random replace on it, and this is what it filled in instead. So probably another technique would be more appropriate for a phone number, but you can see kind of how it looks there. And then there is a data classification dashboard as well, which they made this pie chart really huge. But you can see that same view of the fields, and then if you wanted to dig into it, you get a list of everything you've tagged as PII. So that's that. I think that's a pretty neat feature. As a demo. So secrets management is another feature. The benefits of this is going to give you more granular access control, secure the storage of those, and then secure discovery. The main use case for this, right, is going to be in the ITOM space, I would say. That's kind of how they lay it out in the documentation as well. Previous to this, you store things in the credential table. I'm like, if you have access to that, you have access to it. It's not really very granular. An important delineation here is the secrets. So when we're talking secrets, we're talking about credentials, passwords, SSH keys, private keys, integration logins. So And this is passwords for mainly working with external systems, not like user passwords. Granular control, you can create these groups of credentials or secrets rather that are based on scope, table, or column, record. There's a lot of different options for that. There are a lot of those actual categorizations of them are going to differ between the core and enterprise offerings. You don't really have a lot of options beyond beyond scope and the core offering. And then there's this idea of instance and client side secret groups. So instance credentials can be decrypted by the instance, and client side can only be decrypted by the client. So ServiceNow would have access to the instance ones, but it would not have access to the client secrets because the keys are only available when you're in the instance and not from ServiceNow themselves. That's a plugin as well, and you can look at the secrets management in a PDI. So log export service. This is an interesting one too. For anyone who's worked with the ServiceNow logs, especially the node logs, it can get pretty intense trying to look at those. I usually end up opening them up in like a terminal and using grep or like VI to like search through them. But what this allows you to do is pump out your logs from your instance into an external system. So you can look at these along with your other organizational tools, like your security team can use their tools to look at the logs, for some security exceptions. It's easy to set up. There's a bunch of like guided tours and that sort of thing that help you set it up, and it's using industry standard protocols and tools. So it's using Kafka and Hermes, which is a out there in the wild for sure. So it's using Hermes, Kafka. Kafka is an event streaming platform, and Hermes is a asynchronous message broker built on Kafka. Two main types of things you can export would be the node log and the system and audit log. And then when you're sending these logs out, you don't have to send everything, right? You can actually filter your logs for what you're going to send. Like if you're going to send errors or warnings or info messages, you have fine-grained control over what you're sending out. And this is a picture from ServiceNow, how this is working. So once you publish this data to your messaging service, you can set up subscriptions with your different log analytics systems to subscribe to that, and then bring that data in, and then use the tools that you're used to look at those logs, analyze them, create alerts, all that kind of stuff that you would do with a log analytics system. Okay, so how you get this? There is a log export service application that you can install. You can't do this in a PDI. It requires the Hermes service to be set up at ServiceNow. They have to activate the Hermes service, and then I think that will expose the ability for you to configure, who your subscribers are going to be and that sort of thing. All right, code signing. This is another interesting one. The use cases of this, I feel like are pretty narrow, but it's it's another way that ServiceNow continues to secure the instance and make sure that bad code or bad actors don't get in. Like that's a theme in a lot of this, right? The main benefits is it's going to protect your production instance. So what you end up doing is establishing trust between your sub-production and your production instance. It ensures, code pushed to production is authorized. And then again, it's utilizing the key management framework that underpins a lot of these other offerings. So this is a circle of trust. So you're going to you can see sub-productions don't use the code signing feature, but production does. You're establishing this trust relationship between your production and sub-production instances. So there's a whole process you go through before you push something of where you have your update set, for instance, and you're going to you're going to sign this, and then only then will the production instance actually accept that update. The high level process of what happens, right? You're going to write your JVM scripts, you got a hash digest, you're going to encrypt, you're going to sign the code, verify. So this is the high level picture of what goes into that. We could get into this more technically, but that would be a whole other discussion. So how do you get it? This one you have to ask ServiceNow support. It's not available in the store. You have to contact them. Therefore, it cannot be used in a PDI. There wouldn't really be a good way to do that anyway, since you don't have production or sub-production instances in a PDI. Data discovery. So data discovery is also really interesting. At past customers have tried to think about how to do this before this existed, right? So this would be finding sensitive data. So credit card numbers, social security numbers, bank account numbers, those sort of things. Being able to find where someone may have put something like data somewhere that shouldn't be there, right? I know that I've seen, it's crazy to think it happens, but like people put their social security number in like a description field when they shouldn't do that. So this uses out of the box patterns to find that common data. So what you can do is set up these jobs and pick the patterns you want, and it'll go through and scan your instance and find instances of that data so you can act on it, right? So I need to clean it up, or I need to encrypt this, or I need to go through and anonymize it. So this works together pretty well with that anonymization feature. And then it's going to give you confidence in data. It's like, okay, do we really know that we don't have some of this sensitive data out here, like your credit card number? So this helps you do that. So there's a number of patterns out of box. They're based on regex. You can make your own, configure your target tables, and then you get results of that output when you run the job. You can install this in your PDI, and it's done via a store app. So I can show real quick. My job didn't run for me for some reason, but I can show you the dashboard and kind of how this from a high level will be configured. But you get this dashboard, which you can run both samples, which is going to run a smaller subset, or you can run a full scan, which is going to scan everything, and this will display that data. It hasn't run for me in my PDI yet, but you can see here it's going to find the columns with the discovered data, what the column name was, the pattern, how many it found, how many of those records contain that data. Let's just bring up data discovery real quick. You have these out of box patterns, right? And you can see the regex here, so you could come up with other ones. Your different types of credit cards, email, social security number, phone number. So maybe you want to set up a job to look for credit cards and socials, but email is maybe not a concern. You would then set your active data patterns here, ones that can be used, and then which tables you're targeting. So I set up one that just targets task. When I first read this, it didn't find anything, which I guess is good news because I don't have any of that sensitive data in my PDI. And then you have your jobs that you set up here. So it's kind of a couple of step process, but you come in here and you say, so you can do a sample or a full, right? And then you can schedule it to run multiple times. And then you pick a start date, and then your window start and end. This is actually, and I don't know if anyone else has seen this yet, but it seems to be a newer way that they're offering that they're doing scheduled jobs. So what you do is you set a start and end window. What'll happen, yeah, it says it right here. If it's still continuing when it reaches the end time, it'll pause and then start at the start of the next day. So it's not going to like run away and run all day long on you. You can actually time box how long these things run, which I guess would be pretty important if you're running like an entire against like the task table like I am, right? So that depending on your instance, it might take a while. Yeah, and then you can see the results, when it ran and if it was complete or not. So that's a cool feature, which I think, would be really useful to a bunch of different customers. And actually, that is the end of the products. So Again, this is meant to be like a high level overview of what's in Vault. I highly recommend taking the Vault course on Now Learning, and you'll get, a lot more detailed on the different products and how they work, and like more into the implementation and configuration of them, the differences between the packages, the more detailed stuff. And also, we're working on standing up a COE for Vault here at GlideFast, right? So we can build up some more knowledge about each of these individual products and features. I did see, a question about a really great question, right? Like, what industries would purchase this, right? I mean, some of these I don't know if they'd be industry specific, right? A lot of this I think would cross against all of them. I mean, I know before the anonymization came out, for instance, we had a customer who was concerned about having their developers who maybe were from some other countries be able to see customer data in the development instances. Like, they didn't have access to production, but they had access to the development instances. And they're like, well, they can, if they're admins, they can kind of see all the data. But if you have the anonymization feature, you can go in and wipe out that data, or, wipe it out, randomize it, make sure it's, protected, that it's not something that can be leaked out. So I thought that's a very interesting use case for that. Hope this was useful. Again, it was meant to be very high level. A lot of these concepts get to be very, very technical, and you can spend a lot of time discussing each one of them in depth. And it's actually hard to know each of them in a lot of depth, I would say too. So, but I hope this helps. When someone says, "Oh, we want ServiceNow Vault," it's like, well, which part of ServiceNow Vault, right? Which actual offering are you looking for? And be able to speak to, at least at a high level, what the offerings are and what they bring you. Thanks for attending, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.